Welcome to the latest edition of Until Saturday, Instant Reaction Edition, Emergency Episode Edition, whatever you want to call it, exclusive to YouTube edition. We don't usually do these on Tuesdays. I'm usually laying on my couch with my shirt off, but here we are to talk about Michigan sign stealing, and trying to contextualize this the best that we can. Now, listen here, Dave. There's a lot of things that we could do to jump to conclusions or to come up with, takeaways and thoughts. And I think that it's important that we make, and coming from me, I'm the person who needs to be taking this advice the most, rational adult conversations about something that could be serious, might not be serious. I don't know exactly how this is going to wind up, but it's something that I think we need to have an adult conversation about. If you are new to the world of college football, or you're just joining us here for the first time, unaware of your surroundings, the Michigan football program, Jim Harbaugh, a low-level staffer named Connor Stalions, which, by the way,
incredible name, incredible.
For a Marine who was sitting in the fifth row of a football game, holding his iPhone up, recording signs, I don't think that would just be like the perfect name for the movie of it. They're being accused of
Wild stallions can't be tamed.
And sign stealing in a different way. I think that sign stealing to a certain extent is a pretty common practice in college football and other sports, but Michigan is being accused of traveling to away venues and getting them at other places that aren't on the All-22 tape. Connor Stalions was buying tickets under his own name. He has a weird Venmo history. There's a lot of things here that make it seem as if a Michigan staffer was traveling to games of future opponents, filming their signs and preparing them for those games.
Well, it seems unlikely that he was traveling. It seems like he was forwarding the tickets to associates of his. TBD.
And there's been surveillance of whoever bought those tickets filming the entire game with their phone. So I guess regardless of who was there, that was occurring. Dave is working on, or has almost finished, a story on the impact of sign stealing and how coaches feel about it. I think that's going to be an important piece of context when that runs on The Athletic this week. But what's your overall first rational takeaway of this before we kind of peel back the curtain a little bit?
Well, it's a complicated issue, because I think it's not something that's talked about outside of coaching all that much, but it's a part of coaching. Every coach I've talked to is like, yeah, sign stealing is a part of the game. I talked to a coach who basically said, if you're not doing it, you're not doing your job. Felt that strongly about it. Now, sign stealing, as is most commonly done, is on the All-22 film. People watch the TV copy. You can get closer views of the sign steal of the signs and basically be able to chart them. That is different than explicitly breaking an NCAA rule and having someone associated with the program in the stands filming. Now, where it gets very sticky is technically, if it's a friend of this staffer that's in the stands, by the letter of the law, that's probably not explicitly an NCAA violation, but it certainly breaks the spirit of the rule. Now, where that gets sussed out in the NCAA enforcement, and if they can identify who these people are, if it matters that he may or may not have paid them, all that gets messy. But certainly that, based on what is reported and based on what people know, it's clear that Michigan had more information than most coaches have to go off of to steal signs. And the coaches are mad and feel like this is broaching the integrity of the game.
Yeah, and I think that the interesting thing about this is I think everybody wants to jump 9 steps ahead and get to the end of this, of what's going to be the solution to this, what's the penalty, who's going to be held liable. All these things I think are important to kind of wait and see, because we don't know specifically, who's responsible, who's funding the ticket purchases, all the things that go into place, even though it seems pretty blatant right now. Now, there was a video that has been circulating on Twitter. I retweeted it, and it was just kind of jarring to watch. Now, I don't know if in this video there's any blatant proof that rules were being broken, but here's a video from the Ohio State-Michigan game where you can clearly see Connor Stalions, the staffer in question, on the sideline, 2 feet away from Jim Harbaugh, You can go ahead and watch. This is before Ohio State's opening touchdown. I think they scored on this play, actually, which is funny. But Stalions is there. He's a low-level staffer, 2 feet away from Harbaugh, holding a stack of papers that looks like it's a litigation of suing Microsoft. I don't know what's going on here. But
clearly there's a signal being passed
There's
along,
a signal being passed on. The entire Michigan sideline is watching the Ohio State sideline as the signals are coming in. Then once the signals come in, the entire Michigan sideline reacts to those signals. And, like, to me, like, there is nothing in that video that says this is a blatant rule breaking. Yes. But it is jarring to see because we have all this other circumstantial context that are involved, and then when you see it, it's kind of just, wow, I can't, like, look at that.
Yeah, well, the question is not that they use the information, right? It's what is the source of the information. And when you have all of this evidence that this guy's buying tickets to away games, trying to visit schools and being denied, all of these things. If you're buying tickets and you have a security cam of this guy that's an associate of his videoing, and then you're clearly an integral part of relaying signs and relaying that to your team, you can't prove that that's where you got the information. But I think it's not a big leap to say, if you're doing all these other things and expending all this money and making all this effort, that you're not doing that for nothing. You're doing that to gain information. And that
over multiple years too, David. It's not like they're just doing this for fun and nothing's, I mean, you wouldn't keep doing it if you weren't seeing the fruits of that labor. So like the question here, and the number one answer that I think we need, that I'm not necessarily sure we're ever going to get, is how much information is Michigan actually attaining doing this? And how much of an impact, if any, is this sign stealing having in the result of these football games? I don't know if we'll ever be able to quantify that. I don't think we'll ever be able to say Ohio State lost to Michigan because Michigan knew their signs. But there is an interesting situation here in the sense that we have seen this kind of occur at different levels in the sport. We've seen this occur with the Houston Astros in 2017. And I think that's basically people understand and have come to the solution that they cheated to win the World Series that year, right? And then you have the New England Patriots Spygate thing, which I don't think is necessarily quite as cut and dry. The problem that I have here with Michigan is that the sign stealing and the things that have occurred that we're talking about right now seem to correlate during a time in which Michigan's football program went from good to great. And trying to quantify what that means. Is it a coincidence? Did they do something that helped them to get to this point? I think is a very fascinating dichotomy, and I don't know if we're ever going to be able to truly answer that, even if you have this mound of circumstantial evidence that all points in the same direction, but you can't, like, is there a smoking gun here?
Well, that's sort of for in terms of the smoking gun, to be able to say, hey, he's got video from a game that's not all 22 film, maybe on a university computer or on his phone, or the NCAA doesn't have subpoena power. I don't even know if they know how to file a FOIA. So whether or not they have access to his devices or his computer and knows that they've used electronic devices illegally, which is the explicit part of the rule on top of the in-person scouting, we don't know. But I think the reality is that when all those things have occurred and you have all of the evidence that you do have of buying tickets and the security surveillance video and all these things, and I kind of asked coaches if that's what's happening. I spent most of this week talking to some head coaches about, how does this impact the bottom line? And the consensus was a lot. It's different than regular sign stealing. if you are doing sign stealing in the traditional way, you have some idea, you have some knowledge, you can probably get a feel for some of their signals, but they're probably changing them and you're not sure. But if you were sure and you had more than usual, that's going to impact a team's bottom line. It just is. And so I talked to a lot of coaches about this, and I learned a lot. I mean, I haven't really talked to coaches about sign stealing before. I've never really worked on a story about it. I remember Bruce Feldman's piece in 18 or 17 about it. I've read that and was aware that it was a thing, but it's usually pretty self-contained. It's sort of part of scouting. If you talk to coaches, like, that's one of the things that's just like, if you're not doing that, you're not doing your job. That's part of scouting a team. But I learned a lot about how that information is used and how if you have a lot more information, that's a big advantage. And so I don't think that this is just like, if Michigan is doing what it looks like on paper they're doing, regardless of whether or not this person worked for Michigan or whether or not the coaches knew where this information was coming from, which I do believe is very possible that they did not. It's giving you an advantage. It just is.
The question that I have more so, because I don't think that we're going to ever be able to know how drastic.
Maybe.
I mean, I don't know. Like, can you go and look at a tape after the fact and saying, hey, they found definitive proof that they had the signs for this game, and then see behavior of a defense or an offense to counteract whatever play is being called and go, that's beyond the normal scope of what you would get from normal sign stealing?
The short answer to the question is yes. I talked to a coach. It's not in the story, but that basically if you really wanted to know, you'd have to go through all of their film and look at every film and have a coach who could break down what the call was. Like, you have a pretty good idea of, this is cover 2, this is cover 3. Just somebody who was very, very familiar with schemes and it wasn't going to take 3 hours. And you knew with some level of certainty. And if you said, okay, this is the perfect counter to that play, and that's happening
all the
way
time,
more than like a dozen times, then it would be pretty clear. But you'd have to go through the film with a coach's eye to do that.
But it's also like, what does it stop being a coincidence situation?
Yeah, you and I can identify plays, but we wouldn't be able to say, oh, they're running this defense. You know what the perfect route combination is for that cover defense. 2 or cover 3? I wouldn't know the answer to that.
And it's okay to do it a few times a game because you're a good coach.
Well, it's going to
happen. If you do it 25 times a game, then it's beyond the scope of probability, which is then circumstantial evidence.
And so if you wanted to quantify it, that would be the best way to do so.
Yeah. But the question too is like people in the game, because you saw the Greg Schiano interview before halftime a month ago when they
supposedly
played.
he says that's not he says that's not what he was talking about.
Okay.
Maybe he just doesn't want to be involved. I don't know.
But even too though, if you're on the field and the other team has your stuff, it as a player. But no, I'm sure you would be able to feel that of like, no matter what I'm doing here, they're always in the right place at the right time. It's just like if this is happening, there's a lot of people who felt it is the point I'm making.
Yeah. Well, a lot of times. So, one of the things, if you have a team signs, sometimes you would relay it to players. And you'd have a signal like we saw in that video of them pointing up. Maybe that seems like that's probably like if you're pointing up, that'd be a pass symbol. If you're pointing down, that'd be a run. Sometimes it's that simple. Sometimes they'll tell you where a blitz is coming from. Sometimes they'll tell you, you can do that. But it doesn't always have to be relayed to players. If you have your own signals and your coordinator knows, the coordinators have to know to use the information. The coordinators can just get you in the right play. And if that's happening a lot, then you're at a big advantage. I do think that the it's not quite as explicit as like if you were playing Madden and you saw what play your friend was running. It's not quite like that, but it's not entirely totally different like that. So it's different. And I think when you get that information by doing something that, well, if you want to exploit a legal loophole, might not technically be illegal. It's certainly illegal by the spirit of the rule. If you have electronic evidence that you have gotten from a friend, I don't know legally how you'd interpret that. If that person's not, the difference between that and like a random fan.
But you're not just getting it from a friend either. You're purchasing the tickets.
Well, I know, but I'm talking
it's
about
a little different. Yeah.
But if you're a lawyer and you're fighting the NCAA Committee on Infractions at some point, whether or not because we're talking about, is Michigan going to be punished for this? I don't really know. I think that's open for interpretation.
But let me ask you this:
a bunch of people pissed. I know that.
I know they have a lot of people upset, and it's certainly interesting. And I think I've got a good friend of mine on the show here, just said changing the sign helps for sure, but there is effort to have to change that in order that takes away from other game planning. And I don't know how much effort it would take to change your signals, but I think it would be quite a bit, especially if you're doing it the week of a game. But the question that I wanted to ask you here more so than anything is, are you having a hard time sifting through the severity of this? Like internally, like part of me thinks this is nothing at times, and then part of me thinks it's a lot. And I don't really know how to quantify in my internal feelings of like, are we talking about something super groundbreaking, program altering? Like, are people losing their jobs over this? Or is this just stepping a little bit outside of the rules to gain a little bit of I'm having a hard time with that.
I will say this. There's nothing I've said on this podcast that I wish I had back. But Thursday, when this sort of first broke, and we kind of didn't really have a sense of what it was necessarily, I think we kind of downplayed it. And every person I've talked to since then has made me think this is a much bigger deal than we thought.
Okay.
Because I'm familiar with sign stealing as a concept. And I'm like, well, if you have somebody really good at it or something, like, I don't know, like sign stealing is, kind of frowned upon sort of, but everybody does it. I wasn't really sure. But, the more you talk to people and, how responsible has this been for Michigan's rise? I'm leaning toward that it could be very, very responsible if you have a bunch of signs and more than you usually would by a normal scout. As far as punishments, I really don't know, but I know that a lot of coaches feel very strongly that it should be a very strict punishment because, like, the phrase "the integrity of the game" came up multiple times. That this is compromising the sport.
Dave, how you're like 100% welcome into this podcast as like one of mine. You just got called an Ohio State fanboy in the comments. Welcome to the show, my friend.
That's good.
Yeah, the thing that's interesting, the dude who grew up in Arkansas and has covered the SEC his entire life is just a big Buckeye. The thing that I want to know, there's a lot of things I want to know, I guess, but with Michigan specifically, this is a very obviously transcendent time in their program's evolution. With what happened with the Astros, if it's Astros bad, I think a good way of doing it is it Astros bad or is it Patriots bad? Right? Like Astros bad is GM and manager fired. And Patriots bad was a few fines, no big deal. Like, is this going to change the entire trajectory of Michigan's program and rethink? Because it is funny because I don't want to jump to conclusions. But if it is Astros bad, then it has completely and utterly changed the entire scope in which we have judged and thought of Ryan Day and his program. I mean, if you think about that, like if it turns out to be the difference between winning and losing the Ohio State game, I don't know that we'll ever know if that's the case. Then everything that I've said that was negative towards Ryan Day for the past 2 years was unfair, and I feel bad about it. Like it's like a weird I don't know. It's strange.
So the question is the question is this: the way that it gets to be, as you would say, Astros bad, is there's two scenarios. One, if Harbaugh or a coordinator or it was well known that they were directing this kid.
How could it not be known?
No, hang on.
Okay, all right. I just don't understand. Yeah,
the information is known. Absolutely. Okay, so if you directed him to do that, that's worst case scenario. That's like everybody's getting fired if you can prove that. If you get emails or a recorded conversation,
it was actually the idea was spawned by and directed by the head coach of the program.
Hey, you go do this, hook it up, get it, a person away. Okay. That's the worst case scenario where everybody's getting fired. There's a middle ground where he did this on his own. And at some point, people in the program found out this is how he's getting this information. And they were just like, okay, all right. Like, you're still good at it. That's a middle ground where I think some people are going to get punished. And I don't know. That's the muddiest. The cleanest scenario, in which case you just show cause him and cut him loose, is if this kid who had a reputation, as we understand it, as kind of a savant for sign stealing, just nobody knew how he did this. Or maybe there's a couple small other low-level staffers that knew how he did this. This is why I don't think it's that big of a deal that you see him in the ear of the coordinators if he knows the signs, because certainly everyone in the program knew that he was their sign stealing guy. And that was his specialty. What I believe is possible, and the coaches I talked to also believe this is true, and I think it's realistic, is that they didn't know how he got this information. He's got a military background. It stands to reason that a guy with a military background would be better at interpreting signs than just some coach, right? He's got intel. Like I'm sure that depending on what you do in the military, that's probably better training than learning how to hit a blocking sled or, how to get off a release, right?
And that's plausible deniability, at least. Like you could
Yes,
sell
essentially. That's clean. You can say, we didn't know this is how he got the information. He was doing this on his own. And if you look at it from his perspective, the idea that you have this guy who seems to have grown up a Michigan fan, that wanted to be a part of the program, that wanted to do everything he could to help the program and grow his own lot in life, would go to these lengths to do this and make himself
for his
so
own
valuable
personal,
to the program.
for his own personal professional development,
and it's
while
not like
also
he's
the
just-
program. Yeah.
And he loves Michigan. So like on top of that. So it's very possible that's probably the simplest.
But also too, just to push back a little bit. And I know that there's a difference between how that would be perceived in the court of law or in a hearing, but between me and you, if I showed up and said, "Hey, Dave, you're the number one columnist at the New York Times, and I'm a low-level writer. Here are all these off-the-record quotes from the biggest power brokers of college football." Would you run those in an article, or would you know that you need to fix? No, I mean, but you have to, as the CEO of the program. And listen, covering Ohio State for as many years as I did, there have been plenty of did the coach know, did the coach not know scenarios. And let me tell you, buddy, the coach knows. I don't know if you go back and look at the history, or at least the last 20 years of college football, where there's been a scandal where it began with did the coach know, that it turned out that they didn't, then can you think of one? I can't.
Well, but there's reason to believe that he would want to hide how he knew this, and he. But
Harbaugh, but if it is as sharp as we think it might be, where you have a laminated sheet on the sideline of the hand signals, at a certain point, as the leader of the program, aren't you going to stand back and go, "What the hell's going on here? This is a little bit too good." If my wife came home with a duffel bag full of $100,000 and said, "Hey, I got this at work today," that'd be great. I don't want to know where the hell it came from. Don't you think there's a certain level of responsibility as the head coach and CEO of a program to know what you're doing? I almost feel like not knowing would be worse.
But I think if he just came to you and said, "Hey, I have a military background and I'm really good at this," maybe you just want to believe it. And the less you know, the better. I don't know. I think what you said is fair.
Rutgers hand signals are a lot like reading what's going on in Iraq. Is that what's happening here? I don't know.
No, but covert communication or Morse code or all these things.
Body language,
communication,
I don't know.
Something like that. I don't know. I don't know a lot about the science of science.
Yeah, I don't know.
I'm not very good at that. And I do think people are pointing to the hand signal sheet that was it Sharon Moore was holding out, something like that.
I don't remember who was holding
quite
it.
frankly, and listen, I'm just
it looked like a sign language sheet of how to learn how to speak.
I know. I'm just trying to be fair here. Those could have been Michigan signals.
Yeah, they could have been.
It's possible.
Yeah.
There's a lot of unanswered questions here, and I think that there's so much smoke around this is really sinister, and it probably is, that anything that makes it look worse, people are going to buy into, hey, this is definitely that, or this is definitely this. And maybe it is, but there's a lot of jumping to conclusions.
Do we at least have to acknowledge that if we are going to come up with the conspiracy theory of Connor Stalions' military background and how he was able to fool the Michigan coaching staff into not knowing that he would have bought the tickets under another freaking name. It's on one hand, it's
story.
This one of these things of oh God, this guy is a military savant. He knows body language and hand signals, and he's doing this for the program that he loves and to advance his career as a science. But then the number one thing that you would never do ever is leave a paper trail. And there seems to be 9,000 pieces of paper that lead directly back to the same person who was inexplicably on the sidelines, standing 2 feet away from the defensive coordinator the entire game. At a certain point, circumstantial evidence becomes overwhelming. And I know that there's a lot of murder cases out there where you need a murder weapon to put somebody away, but you don't always have to. And it just I don't know. I think that I am past the point. I think I've seen enough to know that Michigan was stealing signs in an unkosher way.
Yes, I think
the thing that I'm
I think to suggest otherwise is a little bit.
But nice. Here's the point that I'm at. I am unsure of how much it makes a difference. I don't play the game. I don't know. So we have a clip here from what Deion Sanders said. I wanted to play this. He was asked about it on Tuesday, sign stealing, and he played baseball professionally and football professionally. Here's what he had to say, and then after we see what he had to say, maybe you can give us a key on what some of the coaches said in the story that's running tomorrow.
I mean, everyone's trying to get an edge. I mean, everyone's trying to get whatever edge they can. You could have someone's whole game plan. They could mail it to you. You still got to stop it. You still got to stop it. So, in football, it's not as pronounced as baseball. If I know a curveball is coming, I got you. You know, with football, I don't give a darn if you know a sweep is coming. You still got to stop it. Physically, it's a physical game. You got to stop it. So that's a little tough. I don't buy into a lot of that stuff that someone's stealing this, stealing that. I don't buy into a lot of that stuff. You still got to play the game. Back in our glory days with San Francisco as well as the Cowboys, you know darn well Emmitt Smith is getting the ball. You know darn well Mike Irvin is running the comeback. You know darn well Jay Novacek is going to do what he's going to do, and you couldn't stop it.
By the way, before you react to that beard, phenomenal. Deion Sanders is just like the coolest human being on the face of the earth. It doesn't matter what he does. It's just cool.
He opened up his presser today saying he's a country boy with city swag, and I was like, that's actually fairly accurate. He is.
But you were listening to this. You were listening to this news conference, and you had a reaction to that.
It was. I mean, listen. It is. So yeah, beyond Deion's look, like every coach I've talked to this week, and I think that when coaches don't have to attach their name, especially when there's a big scandal like this, I think you get a lot more honesty, and they could not be more opposite of what Deion has said. And not to downplay Deion, but everyone I've talked to is coached in college football a lot longer than Deion, has been on staffs where they were a huge part of stealing signs, and have seen how it's done. And so I'm going to take their word over Deion's on this one. I just think Deion's wrong on this. Every coach was like, this is a big deal. This affects a lot. So, and he can say, well, you know, Irvin's going to run the comeback and you're going to get the ball to Emmitt, but you don't know when and you don't know where. That's different. You know, if you know a sign says, hey, they're about to run the counter, you can call a perfect blitz. Or if you know, hey, they're bringing the corner blitz. Hey, what if we threw a hitch to that side and we had 3 blockers with 2 defensive backs out there? So I'm fascinated by this. I mean, we haven't seen a lot of coaches because there's been a bunch of coaches this week who obviously it's the topic du jour in the sport. It's why we're here talking about it. We've seen a lot of coaches get up there and be asked about it at their weekly news conferences, and nobody's really gone out on a limb and said what I think is the truth. Now, I've talked to coaches one-on-one anonymously, and they gave a lot more truth. So I tend to go that way.
The thing that will be interesting is as we go on and you know, more information comes to light is that if this was going on for 3 years, there were a lot of opponents and there are a lot of people who were impacted by this. And
a lot of
schools. Yeah. It's this. And also too, apparently there were tickets to the Ohio State Penn State game that were purchased this weekend on both 50-yard lines, and they weren't used. Funny enough. So, you know, if you're not doing anything sinister, then maybe you still show up to the game. I don't know.
It was a big game. You'd want to see that game.
I actually would just go anyway. Yeah.
Yeah. Think of all the punts you could have seen, Ari. They missed out.
Yeah. But one last question, Dave, then I'll get you out of here.
Mm-hmm.
Between the cheeseburger incident, which is impermissible recruiting visits during a time in which you're not supposed to.
It's a less sinister, it's a less egregious version of what Arizona State and Tennessee were doing, but still bad and still very clearly against the rules.
During a time in which, and I wrote a column saying I don't care about it because I'm tired of caring about stuff like that. But the one thing I do regret about that is I remember how scared everybody was at that time. You know, in terms of the national health crisis that was happening with COVID. So that's a little bit more serious. But between this and now the sign stealing, and like, where has your thought process towards Harbaugh changed at all, or are you still kind of in wait and see mode?
I want to know more facts. You know, I think the fact that Michigan had struggled for so long, they're coming off this 2-4 season in 2020. They hired this sign stealer, and then all of a sudden they win 2 back-to-back Big Ten championships, and now they're the national title favorite. I mean, I write in the piece, correlation is not causation, but that timeline does not make me feel good. Does not make me feel good. So, you know, I'm not going to say, oh, Michigan is great because of the sign stealer, but it definitely helped. You can't say it didn't help. I think one of the commenters pointed out a pretty good point. If it wasn't working, They wouldn't have done this for 2+ seasons. If they figured out in game 4 of this guy relaying signals that, well, he's wrong half the time, you'd probably stop doing it. But they're still doing it. And I think the reality is that the coaches notice, because like you said at the start of the show, when a guy's got your signals, the coaches say it's very clear and it's very frustrating and you can't really change everything on the fly. Sometimes you can, but you run the risk of confusing your kids. You can alter how you call the plays. You can do some stuff, but it seemed like it was out of the ordinary. And that's why so many people were, blowing the whistle on this and saying, hey, somebody's got to look into this, and coaches are alerting other coaches, hey, Michigan's got your signs. That seemed like it was happening pretty frequently. And so I don't know. I want to wait for more of the facts to come out of here, but the smoke is not trending in Michigan's direction on this.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think that's enough for today. 30 minutes on that. I hope that the people listening to the show felt that was a rational conversation. We're not trying to jump to any conclusions. There's still more information that needs to come out, and I'm sure that we'll get more context on it. But of course, as we navigate this, I think it's a very big deal, and I'm happy that you joined me here today to talk about it. Everybody who joined us live on the show, participating, your comments, you're greatly appreciated. We love all of you. We will be live again on Thursday for our Thursday pick show, Saturday for the reaction show, and then again Sunday sound off on Sunday. So until then, guys, thanks so much, David. We will catch you then.